I'm going to begin with verse 509. I covered verse 509 in the previous video, but it leads quite nicely into 510. So 509, it is like the mother who fetches for her child a fruit from the air, saying, "O son, don't cry, pick the fruit. There are so many of them." This describes our situation, our existential situation. There's all this fruit. Don't cry, don't have a tantrum. Go after this, go after that. Avoid that. Avoid some of this, but have plenty of that. We're often told in these teachings that conventional reality, the world as we understand it, is no different, is absolutely no different in nature than a dream. So all these differentiations we make within the dream are like plucking fruit from the air. So this is our situation. We are plucking fruit from the air. We are grasping pie in the sky. And this is what we do from birth till death, until our point of expiration. But as enlightenment practitioners, we've got an option. And the Buddha presented us with an option. The option of coming back to something more absolutely real. But it's not easy to get a handle on this option, to get a handle on what the Buddha spoke about, on what the Buddha was pointing to. And yet he acquired a large following. When he consolidated his enlightenment, he wasn't going to teach because it's so subtle. But it seems that there were some capable of appreciating this subtlety of the teaching and realizing its truth. But in the course of his many years teaching, it's questionable to what extent many of the monks in the Buddha's order were capable of appreciating this subtlety. So it seems that the Buddha resorted to other means. And verse 510 mentions this. "In like manner I make all beings covet varieties of imagined fruit, whereby I lead them to the truth that goes beyond the antithesis of being and non-being." So, the truth that goes beyond the antithesis of being and non-being, that's another description for what I've just spoken about. Being is identification. I identify with this. I don't identify with that. This is who I am. This is my being. That is not my being. So that's the ordinary conventional reality which most of us are caught up in most of the time. But what does the Buddha do? He makes all beings covet varieties of imagined fruit. So this is actually making false promises. Now, this seems somewhat dubious, but perhaps it's necessary. These texts, for example the Lankavatara Sutra, would not have survived if they'd not been credited with magical power. They don't have any magical power. But because they were believed to have magical power, they were revered, they were worshipped. These texts were worshipped. Homage to the White Lotus Sutra. So you wouldn't expect it to actually read the texts you're expected to invoke their magical power just by even mentioning their name. So these texts haven't been kept alive by virtue of their content, by virtue of their intention. They've been kept alive by virtue of people's beliefs, people's erroneous beliefs about them. In other words, you've got to spin a yarn. It's rather like the story of the burning house. The children in the burning house are so engrossed in play that the uncle has to tell them that there are even better toys outside for them. And in this way, they'll leave the burning house. So this is what the Buddha does. One of the great imaginary fruits is that of siddhis. If you practice your meditation, you'll develop siddhis, supernormal powers. You'll be able to fly through the air, walk through walls, hear things from a distance, and so on. And these powers have been categorized, classified. You can remember past lives. So there's all these wonderful things that are promised you if you get on with the practices. This is all a lot of nonsense. Don't take my word for it though. If you believe otherwise, off you go and practice. And let me know when you've achieved some supernormal powers. The unfortunate thing is that many gurus, many teachers actually believe this themselves. They actually believe in these siddhis, even though they haven't manifested themselves. They'll still teach others that if you practice, you'll achieve these siddhis. So the Buddha says that by promising such things, he can guide them to the truth. But I don't think it works that way. I don't think it works that way at all. These things are a dead end, and you can spend much of your life pushing against this dead end. And people who are interested in this sort of thing, in supernormal powers and power of any kind, whether it's good health through practicing yoga and so on, they're not actually interested in the truth. They're interested in what they can get out of it in order to benefit themselves on a personal level, even if they justify it in terms of helping others. I will develop the siddhi of healing people. That's just another aspect of the ego. Admirable as it might be. So none of this has got anything to do with the truth. There's actually a story I'd like to look at which I think exemplifies this quite well. So I might take a bit longer today, so I hope you'll bear with me. This is the story of Nanda and the 500 dove-footed nymphs. It's a story from a section of texts known as the Udana, which is part of the Pali Canon. And apparently this is a very ancient part of the Pali Canon. And when you read this text, it's got a certain charm. It's got a certain ring of authenticity. Apart from the casual use of instant teleportation and visiting the heavens, you get a real sense of the historical context here. So I've got this translation from a website, Sacred Texts of Buddhism, but there's various translations online. So I'm going to read this because it's quite a charming story, but it's got quite a few things which we need to be quite critical of in it. Thus have I heard. On a certain occasion the Blessed One dwelt at Savatthi in the Jetavana, the garden of Anathapindika. Anathapindika was a merchant who donated a large garden to the order of monks. Now at that time the Venerable Nanda, a cousin of the Blessed One, we mustn't confuse this with Ananda, another cousin of the Buddha, this is a different one, said to a number of bhikkhus, "Friends, I am unhappy leading the religious life. I am unable to bear the burden of a religious life. I intend to abandon the precepts and return to the lower life." And a certain bhikkhu, certain monk, went to where the Blessed One was, and drawing near he saluted the Blessed One and sat down respectfully apart, and while thus sitting he said to the Blessed One, "Sire, the Venerable Nanda, a cousin of the Blessed One, has spoken to a number of bhikkhus, saying, 'I am unhappy leading the religious life,' and so on. I intend to return to the lower life." And the Blessed One called one of the bhikkhus to him and said, "Go thou and in my name summon the bhikkhu Nanda here, saying, 'The Master, friend Nanda, has sent for you.'" "So be it, sire," said that bhikkhu in assent to the Blessed One, and he went to where the Venerable Nanda was, and drawing near said to the Venerable Nanda, "The Master, brother Nanda, has sent for you." "So be it, brother," said the Venerable Nanda in assent to that bhikkhu, and he went to where the Blessed One was, and drawing near he saluted the Blessed One and sat down respectfully apart, and the Blessed One said to the Venerable Nanda, as he sat there apart, "Is it true what I hear, O Nanda, that you have spoken to a number of bhikkhus, saying, 'I am unhappy leading the religious life,' and so on? I intend to revert to the lower life." "Even so, Lord." "How is it, Nanda, that you are unhappy leading the religious life, and intend to abandon the precepts and revert to the lower life?" So now we get to the point. "O sire, a daughter of the Shakya race." The Shakya clan, the Shakya tribe, was the tribe of the Buddha. Perhaps they were a particularly handsome clan. "A daughter of the Shakya race, the fairest maiden in all the land, looking out of the window with hair half braided, called out to me as I was leaving my house, 'Delay not, sir, thy return.' So calling her to mind, sire, I am unhappy leading the religious life. I am unable to support the burden of a religious life, and intend to abandon the precepts and revert to the lower life." So it seems that Nanda was rather smitten. Must have been quite an occupational hazard if you were a bhikkhu, a wandering monk, going round the villages collecting your alms. You were supposed to keep your eyes downcast, but it would have taken tremendous discipline, especially when this fair daughter of the Shakya race, who'd probably just finished her morning ablutions and was braiding her hair, calls out to him. Even the sound of her voice would have sent thrills through his body. So this is actually quite a problem. And I'm not sure the Buddha's solution was particularly practical. But let's see what the Buddha did. "Then the Blessed One, taking the Venerable Nanda by the arm, and just as if a strong man should outstretch his bent arm, or draw back his outstretched arm, even thus he vanished from the Jetavana and reappeared in the heaven of the great 33. So this is one of the lower heavens, the heaven of the 33 gods. Now at that time some 500 dove-footed celestial nymphs had arrived to minister to Shaka, the king of the gods. Now, the normal translation is dove-footed, which sounds rather nice. Dove-footed nymphs. But when you think of a dove, it's a bit like a pigeon, and there's nothing very nice about pigeons' feet. But the translation here is actually pink-footed celestial nymphs. So it must have been a particularly enticing, delicate foot. So this particular translation, I'll just stick with pink-footed, even though duff-footed sounds rather nice. Then the Blessed One called the Venerable Nanda to him and said, "Do you not see, Nanda, these 500 pink-footed celestial nymphs?" "Even so, sire." "What do you think, Nanda? Which is the most beautiful, the most lovely, the most entrancing, that daughter of the Shakya race, the fairest maid in all the land, or these 500 pink-footed celestial nymphs?" "It is, sire, as if she was a singed she-monkey, with ears and nose cut off. The daughter of the Shakya race, the fairest maid in all the land, is not to be reckoned with these 500 pink-footed celestial nymphs. She is not worth a fraction of them, not worth having. These 500 pink-footed celestial nymphs are the most beautiful, the most lovely, the most entrancing." "Rejoice then, Nanda, rejoice, for I will guarantee you the possession of those 500 pink-footed celestial nymphs." This doesn't seem quite politically correct, does it? "If the Blessed One will guarantee me the possession of these 500 pink-footed nymphs, I shall lead, sire, the religious life in happiness." Wouldn't we all? Well, wouldn't all of us men anyway? Then the Blessed One, taking the Venerable Nanda by the arm, just as if a strong man should outstretch his bent arm, and bend back his outstretched arm, even thus he vanished from the heaven of the great 33 and reappeared in the Jetavana. So you think, problem solved, but there's more. And the bhikkhus heard a report that the Venerable Nanda, the cousin of the Blessed One, was leading the religious life because he had been promised celestial nymphs. For it was said that the Blessed One had guaranteed him the possession of 500 pink-footed celestial nymphs. And the bhikkhus, the companions of the Venerable Nanda, called the Venerable Nanda a slave, a mean person, saying, "This Venerable Nanda is a slave, a mean person. This Venerable Nanda, we hear, leads the religious life for the sake of celestial nymphs. The Blessed One, we hear, has guaranteed him the possession of 500 pink-footed celestial nymphs." So, it obviously made an impression on the other bhikkhus. Perhaps they were a bit jealous, but it seems that they kind of looked down on Nanda's motivations for leading religious life. And the Venerable Nanda, saddened, humiliated, and rendered despicable by the abuse of his companions, who called him a drudge and a mean person, alone, remote from the haunts of men, ardent, resolute, self-possessed, not long afterwards, for the sake of which signs of noble families abandon their homes for the homeless state, he, acquiring by himself and realizing the higher knowledge, attained in this very existence to the supreme consummation of a holy life. He knew that rebirth was at an end, the religious life had been lived, that which ought to be done had been done. I have finished with this world. And the Venerable Nanda became yet another of the Arahats. So, this news spreads amongst the bhikkhus, and the Blessed One, the Buddha, knows of it as well. And the point about this section of scriptures, the Udana, is that they conclude with an utterance of the Buddha. And the Blessed One in this connection, on that occasion, breathed forth this solemn utterance: "He who has crossed the slough of impurity, who has crushed the thorns of desire, that bhikkhu, whether there be ease or discomfort, is at peace. So Nanda was no longer interested in the duff-footed nymphs, and the Buddha was released from his promise to deliver them. So it seems that it wasn't actually the promise of the nymphs which spurred Nanda on. It was the sense of shame he felt inflicted on him by the other bhikkhus. And I'm not sure that that's actually a better motivation. This story is really about getting on with your practices. It's about purifying the mind. It doesn't seem to matter what the motivation is for doing your practices. Do your practice and you'll get the results. The thing about this story is it's bereft of any insight. It's bereft of any understanding of the true nature of the world, the true nature of the objects of desire. And it seems to be implying that it doesn't matter what your motivation is, as long as you get on with the practices. But if your motivation is to achieve something, even if it's to achieve self-respect, as it turned out to be in Nanda's case, then that's going to corrupt your realization. It does seem that Nanda did manage to overcome some very basic desires. So let's give Nanda the benefit of the doubt here. Let's say he conquered his passions. But it's very difficult to see how you can do this without insight into the nature of the world and the nature of your own identity. And none of that's mentioned here. And I think we have to consider the Buddha's strategy of offering Nanda possession of 500 celestial nymphs. Is this really a valid motivation for pursuing the spiritual life or spiritual practice? It's going to reinforce wrong understanding. And we get this understanding in Buddhism that the Buddha taught everybody in accordance with their needs, in accordance with where they're at. The thing is, you can only do this on the level of being a counsellor. You cannot impart or point somebody to spiritual truth who is passionately desiring something. Somebody who's passionately caught up in their moods or their hormones or whatever. You can only help them manage that or deal with it. So this isn't a level of counselling. There's nothing spiritual about this at all. There's nothing actually spiritual about this story of Nanda and the nymphs. The Buddha did not teach Nanda in accordance with his abilities. He made a promise to him, and it seems it wasn't a false promise, because these nymphs seem to exist in this heaven. But it's a very dubious promise. And the Buddha of the Mahayana Sutras would have got Nanda to question the reality of the objects of his desire. So that's really what I wanted to cover. This idea that the Buddha teaches in accordance with people's needs. What you are in effect doing is simply counselling. There's no spiritual teaching going on. And this is something that we can discern for ourselves as we read the Buddha's texts.